What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with GhostRider, which all of you all seem to love. And I think you guys are really going to love the way this comic book ends, the way this story arc ends. It's really, really awesome. So what this does here is, again, this kind of continues on the journey that we've had so far. And as always, you'll find a link to the GhostRider playlist down in the description. But it follows the journey of, like, Johnny Blaze. Right now, again, one of the things that we talked about in the first couple videos, and one of the things that I think is worth reiterating here, is that unlike in years past, when Johnny Blaze and the GhostRider kind of worked in tandem, one of the big issues that he's contending with right now is that the relationship between himself and GhostRider is very similar to, like, Bruce Banner and the Incredible Hulk in the early days of Marvel Comics. Johnny Blaze turns into the GhostRider, but he doesn't recall anything the GhostRider does. And he might wake up days or even weeks after becoming the GhostRider and just kind of have to pick up the pieces. Now, there is going to be something really cool that Benjamin Percy throws into the story that's really going to be fun. But again, a lot of this deals with kind of getting Johnny Blaze back to his roots, right? That now that he's kind of back to being the GhostRider, it's really more him boots on the ground, that he's sort of out there in the world dealing with all this devilry and all that kind of crazy stuff. And so one of the things that happens is he talks about what's called the Red Road. And the Red Road is called that because it's this road where seemingly anytime anybody travels it, they ultimately die in some capacity. Animals that run across the road will ultimately end up being killed, right? People will go on the road, right? They'll head on a road trip and they'll drive down the Red Road and they'll never make it to their destination. No one will ever know where they went to. But there's rumors that kind of circulate around out there. Now, the big question you have to ask here is that if nobody ever survives, then how are the rumors getting out there? But the big thing, the cool thing, right? Comic book logic, just kind of run with it. One of the things that happens here is that Johnny Blaze basically gets a ride with a hitchhiker. Now, of course, that begs the question, if you're walking down a road where seemingly everybody who's on that road dies, why would you get into a car with a stranger, right? But again, one of the things to remember is that he's literally imbued with a being that's powerful enough to challenge some of the strongest cosmic entities in existence. He just largely hangs out on Earth. And so what ends up happening is that the way the stories go is that those individuals who drive down this road will ultimately be met by, like, a truck. And this truck is almost kind of powered by demon energy or something like that. So for those of you guys who remember Stephen King's Maximum Overdrive, think that, right? But instead of it being potentially aliens or some unanswered cause, it's quite literally just kind of a demon-controlled vehicle. But the reality here is that where initially Johnny Blaze sees a truck and then believes that, like, this is the truck that, you know, kills people and so on, that of course it ends up just being a truck that's transporting a whole bunch of sheep. But as he starts talking to this guy's really, really fascinating, right? He basically starts asking him, like, what's your name and where do you come from and that kind of thing. And he says that, like, these roads here, right? Things like the Red Road, that when the time came when, like, the interstate system, right, the highway system was built to transport people from one state to another, those were all done for convenience. And it made it very, very easy to travel, right, in between states. And so that meant that roads like this ended up just becoming back roads. That at one point they were highly traveled roads, but nobody really travels them anymore. And so roads like that are so dangerous. And so he's really kind of leaning into the idea that there is something off about the Red Road. The problem with this is that as they end up making their way over to, or at least kind of continue driving, they end up coming across, like, the truck that was transporting all these sheep that was involved in a massive car wreck along with another passenger vehicle, and seemingly everybody was killed. And that's when this driver reveals that, like, he has been tasked by the Red Road to sacrifice somebody, because if that person isn't sacrificed by this guy will die to the Red Road. So it's almost kind of like a curse that sort of goes from one person to the next. Of course, Johnny Blaze isn't having any of that, smashes this guy's head into the steering wheel and helps him understand his place in the bigger picture. But following that, of course, that's when you get the hell truck that shows up here. Now, what's kind of funny is that there is a driver who survives, seemingly the driver of the sheep truck, right? The one that's transporting sheep. And Johnny Blaze basically gets him to safety. But one of the things that happens here is that Johnny Blaze transforms into the GhostRider and literally tells the guy, you don't want to be here for this. And then we switch, because what Johnny Blaze says is that he doesn't really remember anything that happened there. Now, this is one of the coolest things that I love about this story. Years and years ago, right, when Marvel when they first introduced the GhostRider, and even running up into in the 1990s, when you had, like, the Midnight Suns and that kind of thing, the GhostRider was almost kind of front and center, and Johnny Blaze was sort of a background character. What I love that they're doing here is they're making Johnny Blaze a foreground character and giving us just enough of the GhostRider to show us the kind of stuff that he can do. But the reality here here is that I think focusing on Johnny and then kind of the Ghost Rider second is a way to actually build up interest in the character, as opposed to turning it into what is basically an Incredible Hulk book, which is, if the Hulk's not smashing things, I don't care. And it's a way you actually kind of keep interest in Ghost Rider as a whole. But again, we kind of get this explanation of what the Ghost Rider does, because nothing would be complete without showing us the Ghost Rider smashing things. And so what ends up happening, and probably one of the coolest things that I think I've ever seen, the Ghost Rider literally conjures a hell truck. Like, it conjures an entire truck just fashioned by like hell flames and reality warping, and the truck looks amazing. And then it just like crashes into the hell truck, and like that's it. Like, we never find out what went on there. Now, given all the context of the stuff that we've talked about so far, we can largely presume that, like, the truck was controlled by a demon, and, like, Johnny Blaze, or at least the Ghost Rider, destroyed the demon, and, like, that's basically the end of that. But following this, one of the things to know is that we kind of have to talk about Talia Warroad, because, again, she's the character that was introduced in this story that's working alongside the FBI to track down Johnny Blaze. Now, they're doing that because they don't have all the cards, and they don't fully know everything that's going on. All they're really aware of is the fact that the Ghost Rider, really Johnny Blaze, has returned. Mysterious stuff seems to happen around him, and, basically weird things having happened after he was there. And so that's it, right? Now, Talia Warroad is very much tied into like the occult mysticism, things along those lines, but she seems fairly new to it all insofar as the Ghost Rider and all that, because she hasn't quite put the pieces together. Now, in reality, it's one of the cool things about this. Say, for example, this story involves like the Avengers or something like that. They would know exactly what's going on. And that's one of the things that I love about this, is that it's a part of the Marvel Comics universe, but it almost kind of feels separated from it. Now, that's going to change as we get towards the end of this video, because you're going to see a lot of cameos from just amazing characters that you know and love from Marvel Comics. But one of the things that had also gone on in the first issue of the Ghost Rider run is we were met with a guy named Zebediah, who showed up in the town where Johnny Blaze was being held, albeit without knowledge that he was a Ghost Rider. He was literally a prisoner of demons in a local town. And Zebediah told him, nothing that you see is real, and set Johnny Blaze on the path of freeing himself from the town, and then basically the return of the Ghost Rider. We didn't know anything about Zeb, and we still kind of don't. The only thing that we're aware of is that he is part of a group called the Council of Night Magicians, and by and large, they seem to either be working with or against Johnny Blaze and Ghost Rider. We're not entirely sure. The only thing we know, and the only real reason we even get this, is because of the fact that it's designed to show that the Night Magicians as a group were the ones who were working to free Johnny Blaze. But we don't know what their motivation is. But that is an important thing to mention here, because it does give context to the character of Zeb, and will likely become something that's very important later on down the line. For the character of Talia, one of the things that's really cool about her is she gives a little bit more of her backstory. And again, because Warroad is such an enigmatic character, and because we don't know a whole lot about her, any little bit of her origin story to me has been fascinating. And so what she says is that when she was a kid, she used to be scared of the dark, right? Because the dark showed her bad things. And we've learned about that before, right? That like she told her teacher that like she had cancer before the teacher even knew. Then when the teacher went and got checked, they discovered she had cancer, and the teacher constantly took it out on Talia. But one of the things is that because she was so terrified of the dark, instead, she decided to confront it. And because the dark would like tell her things, right? Bad things that were happening to people, so on and so forth. When she confronted the dark, she realized it was really just her powers, right? Seemingly the nature of her. And so that seems to indicate, at least on some level, how it is she gained her abilities. I mean, clearly a lot of this is really just metaphor, if anything else. And I'm sure we'll actually get a full-on understanding of exactly how her powers work and what all goes on there. But following this, we get into what's probably one of the cooler parts of the story, which is basically Johnny Blaze waking up in a hotel bathroom. I'm sorry, a gas station bathroom. Now, that's not the cool part. I mean, I can't imagine anything cool about waking up in a gas station bathroom. But what ends up happening is the Ghost Rider leaves kind of burned on the ceiling, exit 666. Now, that's one of the things that he talks about here, is that because Johnny Blaze doesn't really remember everything the Ghost Rider does, that what the Rider will do is he'll actually burn clues in writing on like the ground or the walls or the ceiling or something along those lines. And it's up to Johnny Blaze to figure out what it is the Rider wants him to do. So it is cool, and it's kind of fascinating the way this works. But what ends up happening is he ends up, right, going, traveling to this exit, he ends up at a town called Thorn out there in South Dakota. And that in this town, there's like literally flyers everywhere that say, come see the circus, right? The circus has come to town. And so following that, he ends up kind of following the clues and ends up at another place seemingly out there in the middle of nowhere in Minnesota. And that when he gets there, that there's literally this giant tent and there's like these circus guys that are in there. And it's almost something out of Stephen King's It, right? Like literally, they're not really clowns so much as it is like a circus guy and like people are there. But what he says is like the tent would appear at sunset. There was no announcement on the radio or in the newspaper. No warning except the faint sound of calliope music riding the breeze. The people came anyway. They walked away from open cash registers and running baths. They left their cars running and their dinners half finished on the table. And so they're kind of operating under a trance of sorts. And as they get in there, they just kind of do whatever it is that like they're told to do, right? Led by the main magician himself. Now, those of you guys who are familiar with the GhostRider mythos, you know exactly who this is. And it's one of the craziest things. Like, I love the way that Benjamin Percy did this, because as soon as I saw that, I was like, is that who I think it is? And literally this guy just kind of hypnotizes the different people of the town to like go up and do the flying trapeze and then like jump to their deaths. They all pile into a car and they're crushed to death, or like they put their head in the mouth of a lion and they're eaten alive, like they're burned to death by fire. And so as Johnny Blaze kind of rides through and then transforms into the GhostRider, he shows up at this circus, or at least the most recent location of this circus, where everybody in the town has been destroyed. But then he confronts basically the demon force that still seems to be there, which initially manifests in the forms of like an amorphous blob of all these people kind of operating in unison, but then takes on the actual form of the Circus of Crime. Now, the Circus of Crime in Marvel Comics, they were never a serious team. Like, they were never, ever a group that you ever took seriously, right? Like, to give you guys perspective here, imagine the least important Spider-Man villain ever, and then imagine that he made a team of equally unimportant people. And that's the Circus of Crime, right? That's literally what the Circus of Crime is. And so it's kind of wild, because like Johnny Blaze tells like these demonic forces, leave while you can. And the Circus of Crime basically stays. But one of the first things he hits at is he's like, you're not who you're supposed to be, right? Like, I know who you are. I recognize you all. You're a small-time crime group. You don't do things like this. You don't like destroy entire towns full of people, like by forcing them to kill themselves and all that kind of stuff. What in the world is going on? And they simply say, you're not who you claim to be either, Johnny. And then ultimately, they literally wipe his mind, right? Like, the lead guy uses his hypnosis. I can never remember his name, but the guy with like the top hat and everything, he's always been the leader of the Circus of Crime. He was always the guy running the show, but I can never, ever remember this dude's name. And honestly, it doesn't really matter. Ringmaster, that's what it is. It's Ringmaster. God, I was going crazy trying to remember this guy's name. But ultimately, like, he uses his hypnosis to seemingly kind of knock Johnny Blaze out, or at least put him to sleep. And then he just kind of wakes up out in the middle of nowhere. And like, that's basically it. And so the next warning that he gets, or at least the next piece of information that he gets from GhostRider, is 3 days, Hell's Backbone rally, ride or die. And this is when things get awesome. So here's what happens, right? It's one of the coolest things ever, right? So Johnny Blaze gets to this town. You'll notice we're kind of rushing through everything, because honestly, I want to get to like the really cool stuff, right? The really, really awesome thing. So what he says is, when I was a kid, I had trouble controlling myself, right? Tantrum doesn't feel like an adequate word. I'd hit, I'd bite, I'd get red-faced and wild-eyed, I'd cry or I'd scream in a way that sounded like howling. The wolf found you, right? Quote unquote. If you ever rage so hard, your body won't stop shaking. You got some small sense of what I go through every time I change. And he says, every time I become the GhostRider. And he says, the wolf finds me, and it claws and drags all these terrible feelings out of me, turning me inside out and demanding to be heard. Now, the question is, who's the real me? The guy who keeps all that swallowed down, or the guy who goes crazy? And he says, I'd like to blame everything that's gone wrong in my life on the spirit of vengeance, but we always like to blame someone else or something else for our worst behavior. And so he says, the writer told me to come here, to Escalante, Utah, or beg me, I'm not really sure, ride or die. That's what the message etched in molten asphalt told me. We've traveled a long way to get here. We're barely holding on, flaring in and out like a bad spark plug. We can't speak for both of us, but I get the sense we're counting on this being the end of the road. Here's a crazy thing. Once he gets there, there are some of the most notable names when it comes to like magic and sorcery and all kinds of stuff that are here. People that you've seen multiple times, and it seems like it's only a matter of time before you ended up seeing this thing, right? So literally, it's like a giant like a biker race. You've got Man-Thing, Doctor Doom, Blade, Wolverine, Moon Knight, like they're all here, and it's kind of nuts. Right now, the question has to be asked, why are they all here? Right now, cool thing is, we get that question answered, right? He literally says, you'd only know about the Hell's Backbone rally if you hung out in the wrong kind of bars and truck stops and internet chat rooms. It's almost like a collective mystical whisper around us and drew us here. A prize has been promised. If you ride Hell's Backbone from tail to horns, you get to hold counsel with the devil, and he'll give you anything you wish. For somebody looking for trouble, or somebody looking for penance, or somebody who isn't afraid to fight gods and demons, that trophy is worth whatever hairpin turns and deadly drops lie ahead. And that's the crazy thing, is because they're all literally competing against each other to gain a wish from the devil. And this is like a no-holds-barred thing, right? This is literally, what was that motorcycle? Road Rash. This is like Road Rash from the 1990s. Those of you guys who remember that video game way back then. It's like that, right? Like, do whatever you have to do to win, right? You can literally screw up other people's bikes. You can attack them. You have like Blade versus Dracula. You've got Jamie Madrox, the Multiple Man. You have all kinds of stuff here, all kinds of people here using their powers, their abilities, the whole 9 yards. It's pretty awesome to see this happen. Now, of course, ultimately, Johnny Blaze catches up to Wolverine, and as he rides by, Wolverine realizes Johnny Blaze is back. He's like, holy cow, Johnny Blaze is here? And that's the crazy thing, because as they continue their ride, suddenly the road starts to come to life, right? Like literally this hell road starts coming to life and like seizing control of people, grabbing people. You have like this giant loop that they all have to go through. And as they do, the road and like all these demonic beings just start snatching people out of the air, right? That's literally it. It's kind of nuts. Now, whether or not they all die, I'm not entirely sure. I imagine people who are here like Loki or somebody like that, they can escape, right? They can use their magic to get away or something along those lines. But for like the average person who's just like, this sounds like a fun biker race and has no clue what they're getting into, yeah, man, it's the end of the road for them, right? They're done with all their living, whether they know it or not. And so what's nuts here is that as Johnny Blaze goes through this, he starts to realize this is not a race. This is not what's going on here. It's not some race to gain the devil's favor. That was done to get everybody out here. It's a recruitment gathering, right? Like he says, there's nobody here who hasn't eaten their share at the sin buffet. Why should hell wait for us when we'll gladly deliver ourselves right to the devil? He says, by coming here, we've unknowingly been enlisted in an army of shadows. It doesn't matter if anybody makes it to the horned peak of the mountain, nobody wins tonight. And so where Crossbones ends up taking out the wheel of Johnny Blaze, right? Ends up taking out like the back wheel of his bike. Johnny Blaze in turn crashes, cracks his head on the ground, and literally a demon starts exiting out of his head. And so like, while he's there, right, with this demon just seemingly kind of seizing control of him, Wolverine shows up, and then Wolverine rescues him, right? Like literally throws him on the back of the bike. And that's when literally Johnny Blaze tells Wolverine, look, man, you and I have swam in the same pond multiple times, right? Like, we've been in the same area. You do X-Men, you do Avengers stuff, but like, you're a man of the world. You've experienced demons and sorcerers and monsters and Thanos and all kinds of crazy things. So understand me when I tell you, we have to close this road. That if you pass through that exit, or at least through that tunnel, you're gonna end up in the service of the devil, and there's not gonna be any conceivable means for you to escape it. And so ultimately, Wolverine, knowing Johnny Blaze as he does, ends up basically sending his bike flying to the entrance, and then they ultimately destroy the bike and then collapse the entrance. The problem is that in the midst of all this, suddenly Johnny Blaze ends up being taken in by the forces of the devil, right? Literally pulled in. And that's when we switch over to the person watching all this, right? Seemingly the being that organized all of this. And it says, I tried to give you a good, quiet life, and you rejected that for violence. Of course, the original prison of Johnny Blaze is what's being referred to here. And then it says, so I tried tried to enlist your violence for a grander purpose, but you rejected that too. If you're not going to join us in our path to a shadow country, then I, Blackheart, will have to end Johnny Blaze and the GhostRider. Blackheart being none other than the son of Mephisto himself. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.